It's now becoming a global marketing theme pushed along by government action and regulators to help the transition to a green economy, which is, of course, why the Astana International Finance Centre is looking at this, because Kazakhstan has green economy objectives. We're now looking to see green finance being part of supporting that transition. I said in the previous session, our environmental challenges are very, very severe, with a mix of environmental improvements we want to make around the world, but also in Kazakhstan, to air pollution, water scarcity, agricultural land degradation. We also have the looming threat of climate change. We need to act very quickly to avoid catastrophic consequences in our lifetimes, in my lifetime, and I'm old, look how much grey hair I've got. There's not long to go. So that requires fast action on these challenges. Now, green bonds are the most famous, the dominant, the headlining financial instrument. They're not the only one, but it's the biggest market. We've now seen, as I said, very fast growth, and we expect to see 50 to 60% growth this year on last year's initiative. Our goal globally is to see $1 trillion a year issuance in 2020 as a landmark for contributing to addressing our environmental and climate change solutions. To speak today, we're privileged to have 3 speakers, and then we'll have a panel discussion. We have Ma Jun, who's the Director of the Centre of Finance and Development at Tsinghua National Institute for Financial Research, which is his current job. But what you need to know about Ma Jun is that he's also the architect of China's green finance revolution that's happened in the last few years. He's chair of the China Green Finance Committee. He's senior advisor to the central bank governor, the People's Bank of China governor, and he's been the chief economist of the Research Bureau of the Chinese Central Bank for the last few years. He will kick us off, and then we'll hear from Yanar Zanadil, who's the co-managing director for economics and finance at Samruk Kazyna. And we'll hear from Russell Urazgulov, who's head of strategic and budget planning at Astana. I am hoping personally, that Astana will become the first green bond issuer in Kazakhstan. Cross your fingers, please, and let's see what he's got to say. But first, Ma Jun, if you can kick us off with your comments, please come to the podium.
Thank you very much, Sean, and good morning, everyone. Now, let me kick off by stating what I believe as a few building blocks for developing a green bond market. Number one, you need a taxonomy or definition. And number two, you need a verification process. I will explain that later. And number three, you need disclosure of user proceeds. And number four, you need disclosure and measurement of impact, which is impact on the environment. I'm going to base my discussion on the Chinese experience over the past few years on each of these 4 or 5 elements. The definition is a key, because if you don't have definition, nobody can trust you whether the bond issue is green or not, and whether proceeds effectively have environmental implications, environmental benefits. So in China, what we did in 2015, before we launched the Chinese green bond market, was to spend 6 months working on the definition. That definition was drafted by the China Green Finance Committee, which I chaired, and we spent, as I said, 6 months organizing about 40 experts from different sectors. And after they have done their drafting for about 3 months, and we circulated to 100 institutions. At that time, these are the members of the China Green Finance Committee, including banks, asset managers, insurance companies, brokers, and other type of investors, of course, green companies. So it was a 6-month process of drafting the document called China Green Bond Catalog. And that catalog was based on international experience, of course, partly based on the Green Bond Principle and based on the Climate Bond Initiative standards and some of the multinational banks' standards like World Bank and EIB and so on. But we reflected a lot of Chinese sort of a national features, including the environmental policies in China, because clearly China is facing a lot of environmental issues which probably OECD countries don't have, at least in terms of severity, for example, air pollution, water pollution, land contamination, and so on. So in our document or definition for Chinese green bond catalog, it's clearly that we're addressing 3 different sets of issues. Number 1, pollution issue. Number 2, it's a carbon issue. That's called addressing climate change. And number 3, it's efficiency of resource utilization, which means that we have to save water, we have to save energy. So all these 3 objectives are reflected in the fairly lengthy, detailed document called China Green Bond Catalog. And this document is as long as 10 pages. It's not just 1 page or 5 sentences, 10 pages long, involving 6 categories and 31 small categories, as well as detailed footnotes on how do you actually interpret the specific requirement for the small categories. Just to give you an example on solar or wind, a lot of people are debating on whether solar in its lifetime is in fact reducing emission. It may or may not, because from the very beginning of the product cycle, you start with probably mining industry of digging up the iron ore in order to produce steel. Then you begin to produce steel, burning a lot of coal, and then you have to do the transportation of steel into a plant that's making the equipment. And from the equipment company to the site of the power generation, you do a lot of transportation, which burns oil and coal as well. So the entire process has a very long lag, which is polluting and high emission. But only the last leg of solar and wind is cleaner because it generates power without a type of a pollution, SO2 or NOx or CO2 that's generated by coal-fired power. So really, you have to measure the efficiency of the solar and wind power generation in terms of how much you can convert into the cleaner energy. So we're putting a lot of specific numerical requirements on the efficiency of these technologies. If it's below the threshold, that solar project is not considered as green in the Green Bond Catalog. If it's above, it is considered as green. So this is the type of work we did in the Chinese Green Bond Catalog. That was introduced in December of 2015, and that document, together with a couple of other documents from the central bank, kicked off the Chinese green bond market. In the second year, which is 2016, China issued 230 billion RMB worth of green bonds, and accounted for about 40% of the global total. So you can clearly see the impact of a definition. It kicks off the market in a very significant way. The second element of the green bond market is verification. Now, once you have the definition, you have to make sure that someone is going to stick to the definition, use the definition, and honor the definition. It's not clear that whether the issue itself will do the same thing in the correct way. Very often, the issuer believes we are issuing a bond for a green project. But in fact, it's not. That's why we have to put in a lot of specialized agencies, which are called verifiers. Sometimes it's called second opinion providers, sometimes third-party verifiers. But in China, in the last 2 years, we incubated about 13 verifiers that help the issuer to assess whether the projects they want to finance with green bond are actually green or not. And during the verification process, I heard a lot of stories that the verifiers stopped a lot of non-green projects from being labeled as green projects. So it's a very successful process of screening and making sure that the projects financed by green market is indeed green. Why do the Chinese issuers use the verifiers? That's a tricky thing. In the PBOC document issued in December 2015, we clearly stated that we, as a regulator, encourage the issuer to use a verifier. We did not say you have to use, but we encourage use. And the reality is that 90-something% of issuers do use verifier because of government encouragement. It's just the one sentence. It has a huge impact on the market behavior. And the other few percent are, in fact, getting internal verification because they went through another process of getting approved by the NDRC. NDRC has an internal team for doing the verification. So in fact, I think nearly 100% of the Chinese green bond issuers get a verification process. The third element is about disclosure. And in the regulators' documents, including the PBOC requirements and the stock exchange requirements, CSRC requirements, they all clearly stated that each issuer has to disclose the use of proceeds. And they do. Some of these issuers, according to requirements, make the disclosure on a quarterly basis, some make disclosure on a semi-annual basis, and they have to do it on the annual basis as well. And not only disclose it to the market, but also disclosing to the regulators. And a more recent requirement is to require the issuer to disclose environmental impact of the projects. Just saying that we are green is not enough. Tell me how green you are. Namely, how much CO2 you have reduced with the bond finance project, how much SO2, NOx, COD you have reduced, and how much energy saving you have achieved, and how much water saving you have achieved. Calculate the number of tons of energy, water saving, and number of tons of reduction in CO2 and SO2 reduction. So this is a new requirement which is beginning to be imposed on issuers. It's not fully there yet. We have stated in a document that we encourage you to disclose the environmental implication, but because the process is quite complicated, the verification and calculation methodologies are quite complicated, we're now organizing the industrial specialists to help the issuer to reach that level of capacity. But it's already as part of the direction of the green bond sort of ecosystem. And adding one more point of how do you make sure the verifiers are actually telling you the truth. Now, that's another tricky thing. And one problem we faced in the past 2.5 years is that there are too many verifiers, because the verifiers actually make money from their customers. And some of the small verifiers began to enter into the market, seeing this is a business opportunity. And just a couple of guys coming to the market saying, hey, I can do the verification. I offer you a very, very low price for the service. And if the price is too low, the quality of verification must be low. That's why we were alerted at the regulators level by this potential risk. And end of last year, the PBOC and the China Securities Regulatory Commission came up with new requirements about really verifying the verifier. We want to make sure the verifiers actually have the ability and quality of conducting the green bond verification, and we made some minimum requirements of the qualification of the personnel in the verifiers, and also the standard reporting templates for the verification reports. Let me kick off from that, and we can discuss more if needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One of the key things that Marjorie said is around the dynamic nature of definitions. The truth is, we're not exactly certain what we're going to need to do in the future, because we're still getting technologies worked out, what we understand about climate change changes. So when we do definitions, we have to ensure that we built in the potential for change and for flexibility. In the European Commission's taxonomy work group that we're having our first meeting on Thursday in Brussels about, one of the key principles is that everything needs to be subject to science input and change if the science changes. So there's a whole process of making that work in the bond market, but that's a key point. I now want to ask our next speaker, Yana Zanadil, Co-Managing Director for Economics and Finance at Samruk Hazina. Please.
Thanks, Sean. I've got slides. Yeah, great. If you don't mind, I speak English, Russian, sorry. Одной из стратегических целей фонда.
One of the strategic objective of this issue is the compliance to various economical and social and financial objectives. That's why Samruk Hazina is implementing a number of various objects on capacity building for renewable energy sources. And the objective of this object is the increasing the scope, the volume of renewable energy generation, like 3% in general power generation. And at the end of 2013, the share made 340 megawatts, and we understand that is a huge task for the 2 years. Whether it is being implemented or not, we need to identify the success of the implementation of the green bonds. Today, the group of the fund implemented the projects of the renewable sources of energy sources for 170 megawatts, and we plan to increase to upscale. And also, I would like to tell about our practical achievements, what kind of projects were implemented, and how we implemented these projects. This is a list of our projects on the screen. We implemented on the basis of Samruk Energo 2 projects. It's the solar power plant in Kapshagai with a capacity 2 megawatts, and another one of the wind power plant with a capacity 45 megawatts in Yerementau, and also the construction of the wind power plant in the area of Yerementau with a capacity of 50 megawatts is in the process. And also we conduct the construction of the wind power plant in Shelek corridor with a capacity 60 megawatts. And the construction of the solar power plant Burная with a capacity 50 megawatts in Jambil Oblast was implemented with a total capacity of 100 megawatts. And this and another similar solar power plant with a capacity up to 100 megawatts. These two projects were implemented. And here, what I already mentioned before, the structure. We in Samruk Energo, we own these projects, but Samruk Kazana Invest acts as a strategic investor, and it owns 49%. And we worked with the Fund of Clean Technologies and with the EBRD, and the loan funds made 70% of the total project price. And we have the scheme for financing the projects of the renewable sources of the energy, together with the United Green and with the Samruk Kazana Invest. And at one floor, at one site, the solar panels, 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer. Just imagine, these are the solar panels at such a huge area, huge field. They were built and located. The table was installed, and on it we installed the solar models, and then we connected to the inverters to convert the solar energy into the electric energy. And the first project, if we spent 130 million USD, while the second one we spent only 71 million USD, and we reached the level of the profitability, and we used the Chinese products with T1 advanced technologies with the leading positions in the production of solar models or the inverters. And as of today, we have 100 megawatt are located in, installed in Jambil Oblast. We develop different directions, and it allows us to use the funds from EBRD and from other financial institutions. And the representatives of EBRD is here in this room. And step by step we have to do in order to cooperate with EBRD. Besides some formal agreements, we conducted the technical due diligence, legal due diligence, financial due diligence, environmental and social due diligence. It allows to develop in a sustainable way those projects. In order to reduce the emissions of CO2, so that at that territory we could avoid the hazardous impact on the flora and fauna in this region. In order to assess how this is environmentally friendly, which doesn't make a hazardous impact on the rodents and other fauna in this area. We signed the term sheet and the loan agreement. It's clear that some details, like the project price and other technical details, financial details, are not for disclosure, but what terms should be followed are mandatory in order to reach the good level of profitability. The loan duration, loan life is from 15 to 20 years, and the holidays on payment of the principal is from 3 years. And then we can pay out by equal amounts of shares, but it depends. But this is negotiable, and the bank rate is less than 10 or 11% interest rate. But I hope that these green bonds would enable to decrease the cost of the project or attract additional sources for financing. Covenants, it's negotiable. On DOLA loan, similar situation, but the interest rate shall be below 2%. And in general, that's all. And I would like to finish my presentation. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them.
In bond issuer, if we can get you a deal that looks good.
Well,
just checking.
Yeah, we have a number of projects which we are considering as a perspective, and everything depends on financial side. If this green bond will bring good rates, good terms, why not?
Okay, so now we have an official race going on between Samruk-Kazyna and Astana. So on that note, let me introduce Russell Razgalov, who's the head of strategic and budget planning of Astana, to talk about what they're looking at doing. Sorry. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to congratulate you with the coming holiday. This is the Astana Day, the 20th anniversary of our capital, and thanks to the nation's leader, we achieved such good results and outcomes. And the image, well, Astana changed a lot, Astana plays the role of the strategic and financial center, and the regional gross product increased many times, and and it was thanks to the huge tempo of the construction. And the capital of each country is a kind of a business card, is a portrait or passport of any country, and and Astana is proving itself as a financial and strategic center in Central Asia to become a real center, comfortable for residents, for the country. It is within the competence of the regional government, of the Astana government. And this task allowed to change Astana and act as a vehicle, as a driver for developing the local economic sector, and efficient implementation of this direction is possible with the utilization of the principles of the green economy, and it was done alongside with the fast high tempos of the structural, ecological, and innovational projects under the mutually beneficial principles. And we think that the task of the market of the green bonds is to ensure the additional funds promoting the environmental sustainability and financial development. And the issuance of such securities should enjoy the support of the local government to support the highly efficient, low carbon industries and energy sector, and the energy efficient buildings, and the maximum generation of the solar and wind energy. Moderator mentioned about the construction of the energy efficient housing buildings. This is one of the sectors with huge capacity. Local governments before had no practice of issuing the green bonds, but now still they had the experience of issuing ordinary bonds. But in year 2016, the bonds were issued for 5 million USD. And in tenge 1.7 billion tenge, and it was the issue was by Terek Development Agency, and in 17 for the issuance of the bonds for 22.4 billion tenge, or similar to the 60 or equivalent to 66 million USD, and to develop the out roads and the communal facilities, and with interest rate of 9%, and also we plan to issue the bonds for year 2018 in the amount of almost 33 million tenge. And also we develop the projects with a maturity of 2 years, and as I said, in principle, there is some capacity, possibility to use the green bonds if we establish certain requirements for the energy efficient housing construction, but the capacity of the local government is limited, and this indicator is limited with a certain amount to be allowed for issuing the bonds. Currently, local government is interested in development of the green projects based on the International Financial Center and efficient utilization of the and the clean transport, efficient water resources management, and other projects. And the local government is considering the implementation the following projects via the issuance of a certain type of bonds. You know that we started the construction of the first stage of thermal power plant and the construction of with the involvement of the grant of the ADB, we develop the concept for construction of the water treatment, water waste treatment plants, the construction of the kindergartens, and construction of housing buildings. And under the 5 initiatives of the President, the project is being developed for gasification of the city. The project would reduce the environmental load and to reduce the coal burning. And since the implementation of those projects is limited with the debt obligations and the national legislation doesn't include certain definitions of the green projects, at the first stage, the local government will use this balanced approach and develop own criteria to select the projects of the green projects and identify the pool of projects ready to finance by the green bonds. And this pool should include the projects with high social outcome and the monetary flow to cover the payments on bonds. And we should include to that work the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of National Economy, the Ministry of Energy sector, the International Finance Center, to elaborate the common or unified position with respect to the green financing. And we need to identify acceptable and non-acceptable issuance of the green bonds, clear principles or rules. And I'm sure that the regulation of the and the elaboration of the unified policy together with all stakeholders, local and international, will enable to develop Astana as the largest international financial center in Central Asia. Thank you.
People issue green bonds for many reasons. They issue green bonds if they're a corporate for investor diversification, which has a price benefit. If you get 25 or 50% more investors to your register of investors, you're likely to get a cheaper price. That might save you a few basis points. They issue green bonds because they get greater loyalty. Green bond investors tend to be sticky. They don't go away. So the next bond you issue, they're there already for you. And that also has a downward price pressure. So this is a way of cultivating very loyal customers, the investors. Sometimes they issue bonds if they can get a cheaper price. You are unlikely to get a cheaper price if you issue a 10-year green bond, because there isn't a market, there isn't trading yet, there isn't price discovery. But in euros or US dollars, where we have trading, we have liquidity in the market, we now have in the secondary market a very distinct price benefit appearing for green bonds, which means that primary price issuers in the market are also reporting reduced price. And that's because the investor demand is so strong. But the investors won't necessarily bid much tighter at primary because they have to get credit committee, the chief investment officer says, oh, I'm not sure. But when you get trading, when you get liquidity, you get the price discovery you need, and that gives you price. If you're going to issue a bond, then a green bond is likely in euros or US dollars to give you a tighter price. That's the thing you've got to be thinking about. But you've still got to be able to issue a bond. Of course, some people also do it for signalling purposes. You have cities around the world, like Paris, San Francisco, New York, London, who've looked at doing bonds for political signalling to their constituencies. Who thinks Astana should do a green bond for political signalling? Please put your hand up. Come on, everyone. Hands up, hands up. Get a few. No, a bit more than that. Okay. I'm trying to get a wave of support for you, sir. Hey, the panel, Marjun. Okay, that's right. So there are many reasons, but the political signalling can be part of it. If we want to signal what Kazakhstan is doing around green finance, a bond is a simple and easy way to do it. If it's green, then it gets attention. So there are many reasons Astana should look at it. There are many reasons companies should look at it. But don't forget the political signalling. And as Marjun said, signalling helps kickstart a market. I now want to turn to our panel and see if there are any questions or comments about our speeches. We have an illustrious panel. We have Liazat Ibragimova, Chairman of the Board of the House Construction Savings Banks of Kazakhstan, a critical institution in the Kazakhstani economy, and from my perspective, a potential green bond issuer if they're financing energy-efficient buildings. Liazat, can I ask you first for some reactions to the comments today? Liazat? Please.
Я хотела бы подчеркнуть, что, наверное,
I would like to mention that today is maybe a historical day because for the first time we are here at the platform at the special session we discussed these green bonds. Talking about our bank, we are thinking about this and we're working closely with EBRD. So, you know, the construction market or the housing market in Kazakhstan consists of the market of offers from construction companies. Rasul has been told about this. So we need to finance so that the housing will be constructed. But I like more talk about the market of demand. When we stimulate through the demand and we are developing some specific offers for our developers. We have been working on a special mechanism on green bond issue through which we would give loans with a low interest rate and with a low first investment for energy efficient housing. The idea was that, you know, recently Kazakhstan has been building 11-12 million square meters, but at this no one is planning and no one is looking for 20 years ahead about the energy consumption of this building, how the client will do services for this building. And so this is the message that could be given to any. So we need to understand. So if a person, for example, buy energy efficient building, in future this person will make economy on its, you know, bills, and it will be less impact on the environment. So of course we can bring it up through some financial instruments, not only by educational reasons. If we had some special tools for loaning to these buildings, of course, there would be a good interest. We would talk about some special standards, and we could actually start with some medium-level standards, and then gradually we would increase the level of this standard to the highest one that maybe are provided for in, let's say, Western Europe and in other developed countries. And here we have the question of the technology of construction, which is very important. So, you know, the future construction is for industrial construction, is for implementation of new technologies, of heat system and energy efficient system. And of course, unfortunately, no one is dealing with this problem here in Kazakhstan. The task is very challenging, but it's interesting. And as my colleague from China said, what we lack now, first of all, maybe we lack, we don't have the first stage, when first we need first give the definition of what the green bond is, who should regulate the issue of this bond, who should give the definition to it. The second stage is the verification stage. When we talk about this project, the international financial institutions, they see the potential of green bonds in this project, but as much this contribution would be good, to what extent can we move our construction sector in this green economy? Of course, here we need to make some more calculations and we have to sort. Our bank today has 35% of all mortgage in the country. Annually, we give from $500 to $700,000, and the issue of last year we occupied 80% share of mortgage in Kazakhstan. Maybe now the structure will be changed a little bit, but if we play the function of the largest institution that works in the system of housing construction savings, of course we have to think on being the pioneers in long-term investment sphere. Our bank has been for already 15 years, we have never issued bonds, and this year we are planning to make the first issue of corporate bonds, not green yet, so that to give opportunity to our clients, you know, when they accumulate up to 20%, so that they could receive their mortgage in a bank. And the second step will be the working on the issue of green bonds, and so that the client would choose not only the housing, but would choose the qualitative housing and would think not about 5 or 10 or 20, 25 years ahead. And so in this issue, I think the support of AIFC and our today's discussion, so this will support all of us and will be important.
Or in good company thinking about this. In Europe, where we do have a building labelling scheme in some countries, we've now had cheaper mortgages become available. Barclays in the United Kingdom, who did a $500 million euro green bond, on the back of that is now offering lower interest rates for energy efficient homes because they have a lower default rate that is a higher value to them, and they're going to use those homes to support their green bond issuance. So perhaps that's where we can get to in Kazakhstan, working with you in your portfolio as the leading mortgage lender in the country. But work needs to be done, of course, on green labelling schemes and figuring out how we go forward on this. I'm actually going to ask Sophie de Jonquière to speak next from Cicero. Sophie, the specific question is around labelling schemes around the world, how we work out what is green. You've been at Cicero a pioneer in this work. Cicero did the very first independent review of a green bond for the World Bank in 2008, I think it was, and has since then become one of the leading second opinion providers around the world. Cicero is a Centre for Climate Change Research at the University of Oslo. Can you tell us about where you think this issue of labelling schemes and figuring out what is green is going to support issuance by organisations like the House Construction Savings Bank?
Yes, thank you, Sean, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I think that to take a step back, Cicero is a climate change research organization. We're a nonprofit, and I work with a climate finance team. And in the life cycle of a green bond that we've been discussing today, Cicero sits at the verification stage. We verify green bond frameworks. Primarily, we have done some green bond project verifications as well. But what that means is that when an institution, an issuer, a development bank, or a sovereign entity has decided to issue a green bond, they come to us and they ask us to take a look and decide what green or how green this portfolio, this potential portfolio, will be. And I think that this is important because it provides integrity to a growing market, right? We apply a couple screens in this process. First, we screen the framework or the project for compliance with the ICMA's Green Bond principles. We also look at governance processes because climate impact or climate risk mitigation is a function of governance. You can say that you intend to be green, but if you don't have a process to identify green projects, screen for your criteria, and then report on them, then it's harder to trust the market. Finally, and I think this is where Cicero tries to stand apart a little bit as a climate change research organization, we screen for the climate science of the portfolio, right? We really look at each project category and try to stress test it, both for the issuer and for the investor. We poke holes in it and we try to see, okay, if I was an investor, what would I want to know about your selection criteria in each given project category? Once we've reviewed background documents and conducted interviews with key people at the issuing organization, we assign a rating, light, medium, or dark green. And Majun has already used some of this terminology, and I'd like to illustrate these ratings a little bit more to answer Sean's question. I think my first answer, my knee-jerk reaction is where this green market verification world is going is to not a binary state, right? Green isn't binary. It's not green or not green, just like a project isn't risky or not risky. There's a range of green, just like there's a range of risk. And the way Cicero looks at it, specifically for light green projects, some of the things that we think characterize light green projects are transition projects. Projects that represent low-hanging fruit and are quick fixes to established infrastructure. For example, energy efficiency, or sometimes green buildings, I think are classic examples of light green. They may lock in emissions. By that I mean it may be energy efficiency measures for technology or infrastructure that uses fossil fuel. And so it makes, while it reduces the immediate emissions, it might guarantee that we use that technology for a little bit longer, right? So as a climate change research organization, we don't necessarily want to lock in emissions, but we do think that light green projects are critical first step, critical for the transition. And the good news is a lot of times this represents operational efficiency, which translates to savings for these organizations, right? We're talking about lower energy costs, lower environmental costs, or maybe if we're talking about compliance with environmental regulations, we're talking about less non-compliance fees. On the other side of the spectrum, we have dark green. And what we at Cicero refer to or consider dark green is an investment that is long-term in scope, right? So it's forward-thinking, and it's a technology or a building or a forest management procedure that will be around in a world in a 2-degree world, shall we say, right? So it represents zero emissions, and it's climate resilient. I want to reiterate that all of them are necessary. I think there's a tendency for some issuers to get to be displeased with a light green rating because it feels like a C, right? On an A to B to C scale, it feels like a C, like an average grade, and I don't think that's the case. I think it's necessary and fundamental. And then I think my second point to address Sean's question is that I think, especially with the TCFD's new announcement, the new TCFD standards, I think there's a growing recognition that climate change or addressing climate change isn't just a nice thing to do, it's necessary. As Majun pointed out earlier, it's good for growth, and it's an investment in a future, in a prosperous society and economy for the future. I think that sometimes we forget to recognize that climate change is a public health risk, And sometimes we forget that some of our biggest corporations have very long supply chains that can easily be disrupted by climate change. So climate change is not just, or it isn't a CSR initiative, as I think sometimes it's kind of looked at, like, wouldn't it be nice if we could all grow trees? No, this is a fundamental threat to public sector and private sector interests. I think we're seeing a little bit more of a recognition of that as we grapple with impact indicators and redefine green. We're looking at resilience a little bit more. So on the next level, I think, is really quantifying climate risk for the public and the private sector, and the emergence of insurance products for climate change.
Sophie, just to be clear, the TCFD is the Task Force on Climate Finance Disclosure,
Yes.
which was set up by Mark Carney in his chair of the role of the Financial Stability Board, has reported now late last year, and its recommendations, which are mainly related to how organisations need to report and clarify the nature of their climate risk, especially banks. It happens, of course, to housing banks as well, are now being adopted in various places. The European Commission has signalled that these will become part of law within the European Commission, the nature of climate finance risk disclosure. The United Kingdom government is doing the same. Other governments are now setting up their own processes. The Mexican government has set up a task force on finance climate risk disclosure equivalent, and so on. So this is a movement globally. Now, this is because climate change is now being seen to become a threat to the operation of the financial system and the economy going forward. Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, I think has said this very well in his speech in Berlin called The Tragedy of the Horizons, when he talks about the need to ensure that the future stability of the financial system addresses risks that we're not currently aware of enough. The risk of environmental catastrophe, of climate change, is one of those key risks. And as a result, the Bank of England has launched inquiries in many sectors into its role as a regulator in ensuring financial stability in the context of climate risk and climate change and what it should do. In the insurance industry, for example, it's made a number of recommendations of what the insurance industry needs to do to reduce its forward risk. This is something, of course, for Kazakhstani banks and so on to start being cognizant of going forward too. So that's a big issue. I want to now go to someone at the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Astana International Exchange, because you're trying to be an exchange, a global exchange, but a local exchange for green finance and green instruments. One of those things, of course, is to help people with disclosure so that investors can understand risk better and make more informed decisions about the right kind of investments. What sort of things are you looking at the moment in relation to green bonds, green finance, climate risk, environmental issues going forward? Tell us what the exchange is going to do.
Thank you. It's my great honor. Actually, maybe next year it's better for me to come back, to talk a little bit more, because at this moment, Astana International Exchange is still under the progress. We are about to launch. So at this moment, we don't have any bond issuance, but I can share some our plan, strategy, and thoughts with you to answer your question. So first of all, to answer your question, what kind of thoughts we are looking for instance, as a potential issuers? Actually, there is a pipeline for this kind of green bond or green securities. But actually, I'm very reluctant to mention the name of these companies. But this morning, since Deputy Hakim...
hang on. You've got companies looking at green bond issuance, but you won't tell us?
No,
this is cruel.
It's still very on the preliminary stage, so it's not very good, to be frank. But as an investor, from the investor side, for instance, EBRD, we know EBRD is very interested. So that's the thing I think it's fair enough to mention. But but I really want to mention one, which actually. In the very beginning, I was reluctant, but now, Deputy Hakim, Akimat of Astana, she has already mentioned. So supposedly, Kimat of Astana will issue the first green bond in Astana International Exchange. And obviously, we have already have some discussing with some even foreign issuers and some situational potential issuers. Because to stop this kind of new bond market, we need to find some benchmark. We cannot just start from some corporate, issuers. It's not very easy for them to get recognized from the market. So that's why we need to work with some potential big issuers. But it's on a very preliminary stage, so I don't want to mention. But I also want to share some what we are doing in Astana International Exchange in terms of the developing green bond market. Actually, Astana International Exchange has already issued green bond rules. So it's in our rule books. It elaborates the listing framework requirements for issuers to issue green bond. For instance, the proceeds raised from green bond issuance should be like using a green project. But what I want to mention is that to announce this sort of green bond rules is one thing. Another thing actually is much more important is that we need to build up the green bond ecosystem in Astana International Financial Center, which I believe is much more important to support the green bond market. Meaning, for instance, we need to foster the market. We need to foster long-term institutional investor. As you mentioned, you just raised very good issues. I mean, probably a green bond is not very difficult to sell in the primary market, but liquidity of the secondary market is extremely important, which will lower the cost of the bond issuance. But I mean, for this kind of new capital market to increase or to bring liquidity in the capital market is very challenging. So that's why we really want to work with a long-term institutional investor, not only with like foreign investor like EBRD. We also want to work with some very local investor. Actually, we did some research. In Kazakhstan, the potential in the capital market from the investor perspective is huge. So we want to work with them. Also, we want to work with some third party to develop the sustainability rating or provide external review, so which can make issuer or this kind of investment trade much easier or feasible. Another thing I want to mention, apart from the bond market, actually, capital market, is like we also have equity market with derivatives market. So in terms of the equity market, we also encourage, later we're going to introduce sort of information disclosure requirement, encourage the potential equity issuer to disclose relevant information, in particular the ESG, their information. To facilitate investor better evaluated their performance in a share, so then make this potential equity be more investable. One last thing I need to mention, as in the morning you raised a very good point that Kazakhstan actually is a bridge between Europe and Asia. Actually, one of the main strategies of the Astana International Exchange in terms of business development is how to support infrastructure construction here. In the Banner Road projects here. This kind of infrastructure, to be frank, Mr. Chairman just mentioned, house construction consumes a lot. However, compared with the infrastructure construction, I mean, that's consume much, the consumption is so huge. So we need to make sure this sort of infrastructure development green, and then this kind of infrastructure construction, Banner Road construction project in Kazakhstan will be sustainable. That's the only, I think, the way. To do that, we also think about maybe later we're gonna work with a potential issue to issue RMB denominated green bond, for instance, and also maybe we're gonna bring some green asset-backed securities. Because, for instance, at this moment, the existing loan and later on, I think more and more loan will be put in the infrastructure sector. So maybe in Astana International Exchange, we're going to develop green ABS to support this kind of current existing loan. So that's what I want to say. Okay, thank you very much.
That's fantastic. You said you've been in discussion with local investors
Yes.
about developing appetite for green finance and green bonds.
Yes.
Is that right? That's
Okay.
fantastic.
Yeah, you are right, but not just for the green bond, to be frank, about equity,
And green equities.
green bond, this kind of things. Because at this moment, a local investor is not active for some whatever reason in the capital market. So, but considering the, given the fact that Kazakhstan is very good in terms of the GDP per capita, this kind of very young working age population, and this kind of ambition to diversify the economy, all of these are fantastic. I mean, in my mind, compared with, for instance, comparables like Malaysia, the similar capital GDP per capita, similar population, their penetration, rate in the capital market is like, for instance, I remember it's like 8%, but now it's like 0.5, maybe something. It's very low. So in that case, I think there must be huge potential for local investor. So at the same time, we're going to work with the international investor, but we're going to also work on the local investor. Yeah.
So that's fantastic that you're doing that work. That's very important to develop a sustainable market.
Yes.
We also need a network of local verifiers and verifiers. Cicero, that Sophie represents, is last year the #1 global second opinion provider in the market. But the #2 one was EY. So there is competition for them. So I think we've got someone from EY in the audience, haven't we? Victor, are you here? Stand up, please. So I say this because we want to support Cicero, but we want competition because we've got to keep the price down. So Victor from EY, if you want to talk to him. And there are other representatives here too. Over the next couple of years, one of our projects with the Astana International Finance Centre will be to grow a local network of verifiers. We need a homegrown industry exactly as China has developed too, where Marjun said there are 13 local verifiers. So we need people who are earning revenue out of it, who are driving and growing the market and helping the issuers come to market in a way. So that's one of the things going forward to look forward to. The other thing we need, and this is the secret to getting these markets going, is we need pioneers. We need people who will be heroes. In 2016, China was the hero country. It went from 0 to hero in 1 year of issuance, and helped inspire issuance and regulations around the world, which is now being promoted by the International Finance Centre, Sustainable Banking Network, explaining how regulators around emerging markets can do it. But it took a pioneer. In the corporate market, it was actually a Swedish company, Vasakronan, who was the very first issuer in the world of green bonds and inspired a market. In the green bond market in general, the first bond was issued by the European Investment Bank, the sister bank of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. They were the pioneer to start growing this market. We need firsts. When the firsts come to market, we need to make sure we honour them as pioneers, because once we have real product, real deals, people get the idea. Without real deals, this is just abstract policy making. So that's what we've got to do. But next I need to turn to Vincent Junhova, who's the Associate Director, E2C2 Coordinator for Russia and Central Asia, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. They've been trying to grow an Eastern European, a Middle East and North Africa, and a Central Asian green finance and green bond market. And you've heard them mentioned many times today as someone who's going to be turned to for support. Please tell us about your work in green finance and how you're going to help Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for all the kind words today, also from colleagues from Samut Kazana and the city of Astana and Жилстрой Bank. We're, of course, very keen to support you in your efforts, either through green bonds or through other instruments. I think I want to start a bit with setting out sort of how, from EBRD side, we've been looking into this green bonds issue. And I think both globally, but then also in Kazakhstan. And then I think it's also important maybe to finish with a small word of caution, if I may. So in terms of our activities in green bonds, it's really consists of 4 elements. We've been an issuer of green bonds ourselves. So since 2010, we've issued about 66 green bonds for a total of 2.4 billion. Admittedly, AIB was first, but we're not a bad second among the MDBs, I would say. Then increasingly, we're also becoming an investor in green bonds. So you may have heard of the news earlier this year that we invested in the Green Cornerstone bond by Amundi, which is the largest bond for green bonds in the world. And last year, we invested in a green bond of the Lithuanian energy utility, which was actually issued following the green bonds principle, and it got a dark green assessment by our colleagues from Cicero. So that's the second element that I would like to highlight. I think the third element, which is very important, and it's already been discussed on a number of occasions today, is that I think it's very important that we support best practices and regulatory developments. So as a bank, we are part of the executive committee for the Green Bonds Principles, and we're currently co-chairing the Green Bonds Principles Impact Reporting Working Group. We're also part of the technical expert group on sustainable finance, which is established by the European Commission. And one of the tasks of this working group is actually to set up a green bond standard and take a bit of a green taxonomy in the European Union. And then fourthly, we also see there's a clear need for technical assistance for issuers. So we've established a dedicated technical assistance program through which we will help green bond issuers in the EBRD region to issue their bonds. So that's a bit what we do in the region. In Kazakhstan, we've been working very closely with the IFC since 2016, really about setting up or helping them with setting up a roadmap for setting up a green financial system. And we think that green bonds is certainly an element for that, of that system. But I think it's important to underline that, of course, while green bonds is maybe one of the instruments, it's probably also, it's not the only instrument, right? To give you a bit of a sense, in Kazakhstan, under our green economy transition approach, we've invested 1.7 billion in green finance since 2006 through a range of instruments. And certainly green bonds is something that we would want to support. But it's probably an instrument that has some specific characteristics, which probably means it's not the right approach for all projects that we want to support here in Kazakhstan. So first of all, what we see, at least for the publicly listed green bonds, they're quite large. So they're around 300 million euros, which means that, and higher, which means that they're probably only for a small number of issuers. So for the more small energy efficiency, renewable energy projects we want to support, they're probably not the best instrument. I think secondly, for the issuer, there's a clear reputational risk because, of course, if the issuer issues this green bond, they need to ensure that they can actually deliver on the green angle of the bond. And thirdly, as also been mentioned previously, I mean, there are some costs associated to reviews pre and post issuance. So maybe just to wrap up from our side, green bonds certainly something that we want to support both in Kazakhstan and in our region, but there's an element of the broader solution to the goals that we have under Kazakhstan's commitment on the Paris Climate Agreement, the sustainable transition goals and other goals that Kazakhstan has. Thank you.
You're perfectly right in saying that. And one of the things we've seen about other instruments, one of the things we've seen globally has been a rapid rise of a green loan market. We've now seen certification in different markets. Of course, we've got green equities already and so on. You know, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what we call it. What counts is that there's investment in the right kinds of infrastructure for the future, whether that's an equity investment in solar, whether it's rail, whether it's water infrastructure. But what we've discovered from markets and what we've discovered from working with investors is that people do like the labelling scheme. Investors in particular in Europe and Japan and Australia and now in India and Brazil and China warm to the idea that there's a large pool of investments they can lump together and they can report to their stakeholders. So BlackRock will tell me, for example, stop trying to convince me that Sunbrook's investments are green, just get them to do something labelled green properly, and then I'll put it in my portfolio, and then I have a simple story that I can take to my clients. Okay, marketing themes work. Labelling schemes in commodity markets work. So in Europe, you've got the growth of fair trade coffee. It's a labelling scheme. It works because consumers associate it with trust. So if it works, we'll use it. So the idea of the labelling around green has been associated with media excitement around the world, with political excitement around the world, with linking to broad-based policy initiatives in China. Okay, if that's the way it works, let's make it work for us. Let's ensure that it actually delivers real, practical solutions to housing banks in Kazakhstan through it. And that's what's happening around the world. So we now have governments introducing incentives, not just for electric vehicles for solar, but for green finance overall. We now have investors setting up green funds, solar funds. They can, not just solar, not just housing. And in these green funds, they will buy bonds issued by housing companies, by rail companies, by solar companies. It gives them scale, because institutional investors need scale. And if they work in silos, they can't get the scale to engage. So around the world, this green theme is working as a proxy for what we have to do on the environment, what we have to do addressing climate change. And that's the background to it. And so now you are getting all sorts of instruments. We have green equity funds, we have green ETFs, we have green equity indexes beginning to appear all around the world, and green exchanges. So Casablanca Finance Center this morning has got a whole green finance program. The Nigerian government has launched the Green Finance Program, so on. It's a global movement. So that's the background to it. But of course, what we're focused on here is green bonds and green debt. So we have a few minutes left. First, I need to ask, does anyone have any questions of our audience? Victor, do you want to ask how many green bonds are coming your way in the near future? Would anyone else have any questions? No, I think he's comfortable. He's got some business coming up. Okay, so while you're thinking about whether there are any questions before lunch starts, I just want to ask Marjun, given what's been said today, given your experience, what have we got to do next in Kazakhstan to grow this market? What's your advice, given what you said about China's experience, for the next 6 months? You're a member of the AIFC Green Finance Committee. What are you going to tell AIFC around green bonds specifically?
I got a few suggestions. One is maybe getting a MDB to issue a green bond in Astana.
Right.
As a demonstration project.
So you mean EBRD or IFC?
EBRD, the World Bank.
Do we have an
ADB,
IFC representative
AIB.
in the Marjun, do we have an IFC representative in the audience by any chance? Do we?
IFC.
Oh, wrong. Stand up, please, so everyone can see you. So we need you to issue a green bond in Astana, right? Thank you. Thank you, Marjun.
One of you guys issue a green bond in Astana, which will bring a lot of expertise, because you guys have done this before many, many times. So you know how to make sure that proceeds are used for green projects. You know how to do the verification. You know how to do the reporting of impact. So all these things, once done here, it's a real case which you can show to the rest of the issuers in Astana. It's no longer reading a book. It's seeing the real guys who actually done this. The impact is very different. And my second recommendation is that for the Astana government to consider issue a sovereign green bond. You probably don't need to issue now, just announce it. And
Yes.
That's a trick played by some sovereign or local governments. For example, in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong government announced that they're going to issue up to 100 billion Hong Kong dollar worth of green bonds. Immediately kick off the enthusiasm in the market. Hong Kong really, I would say, grew from zero to hero because of announcement. They haven't done it, but everybody sees this is a hero already. And the entire market, including potential issuers, potential verifiers, and all other participants begin to prepare for this market to come. So that impact is actually huge. And the third recommendation is that for Astana issuers to consider issuance in China, the panda bond market. The Chinese panda bond market welcomes green bond issuance by foreign issuers.
Okay, 3 very concrete recommendations. Would anyone else in our panel like to make any final comments? Sophie, please.
Yes, Sean, I'd just like to add to my previous comments and say that I would love to see, once we've built a solid foundation of light green projects worldwide, I'd really like to see in the next 2 to 5 years, everybody tying their impact reporting or their green bond as anticipated impact reporting to science-based targets. Because I think that that will get us faster, that will move us forward faster in a tangible way.
So, Liazat, can I ask you, do you feel more enthusiastic or more supportive after this? Can we expect the program to get a green bond from the housing sector in the next 12 months from your bank? Can we be hopeful?
Я думаю, что я почувствовала, что
I feel that we are moving right way, and everything that you have said in the very beginning, that we need, you know, a political effort so that to promote this theme. This is a very deep issue that maybe in the developing countries it seems not really relevant, when, you know, we need just to provide the cheap housing for people. And then, of course, when we talk about energy efficiency housing, which is more expensive, of course, here we need some economical incentives. But here we have our government development institutions so that to develop the right financial measures for the long-term actions and activity. And I would like to emphasize this again. Thank you so much.
As you can see, there is potential, there is hope. We are going to see a green bond market in Kazakhstan. The only question is how fast we can grow it. Please, can you thank our fantastic panel? We're now breaking for lunch, and after lunch there's a session on global networks for a sustainable financial sector. Further on this, please join us after lunch. Thank you again for attending us, and thank you to our fantastic panelists.